actually talk about this in my book, where I talk about how I think there are two basic types of people: creators and destroyers. And
Mhm.
creators will focus on like, what value can I give out to the world? Like you, when you read the 1619 project and it pissed you off, you decided, I'm going to write a couple books,
Mhm.
and you channeled that energy productively, and you're like, I'm going to create something that is a counter to the 1619 project. So that's like what a creator is. A destroyer might see the 1619 project and get pissed off by it, and then just go on a rampage against every single person that's ever voted Democrat ever in the history of the world. And
Mhm.
that's how they focus their energy. It's not on producing something of value. It's not on producing something that's like a counter narrative. It's just on destruction and outrage. And I think that, unfortunately, in the world that we live in, and especially like with doing content on the internet, you happen to exist in this place where outrage sells, outrage gets clicks, outrage, clickbait headlines are the things that people click on, and that's how people get paid. And so there is an active incentive to be outraged more than there is to have a thoughtful, nuanced discussion.
Without question, and that's part of the reason why on social media I'm not the most popular of guys. I do try to throw ideas out there that people would not necessarily be exposed to or think of themselves. And in this so-called society, a lot of folks don't want to be exposed to anything that challenges their preconceptions. Today, it's my Margaret Sanger Appreciation Day. I very much
Tell me about that. I saw that you changed yourself. You're like a Sanger Republican on Twitter. What is
yes.
that about?
Well, Margaret Sanger started as a socialist, but she became a Goldwater Republican. And she did so many good things for people to give them more control over their own lives. People would say just women she did it for, but she wound up actually positively, influencing the lives of men too. So she has been terribly misrepresented by a lot of folks in the quote unquote pro-life movement, saying that she supports genocide against blacks and this and that. And I'm very tired of it. So I decided to make today Margaret Sanger Appreciation Day, where I'm posting positive things about her, provocative things that are positive. And I put in my Twitter username, Joseph Ford Cotto, Rockefeller Sanger Republican. So I think that Margaret Sanger is a great example of someone who didn't even believe in abortion. She wanted to found birth control clinics to give people the ability to plan their pregnancy, women the ability to plan their pregnancies, and families the ability to be planned reasonably and responsibly so society would be better off. She did this outstandingly wonderful stuff for America and eventually the world. And yet she's demonized as someone who just, crawled out of the ninth circle of hell. I find that to be a great example of how, in this day and age, people can be horribly misrepresented and treated as garbage, even though they did something that the very people who detract from them, are benefiting from. Oh, and by the way, I can't just talk about the right here. The left disassociated itself from Margaret Sanger very publicly. Planned Parenthood did in the New York Times very recently, because it found her legacy to be problematic and racist. And basically, anyone who existed before the 1960s is going to be problematic and racist, viewed by the standards of today. So you can see how the cancellation is going on both sides. These people who on the left and the right have benefited from the world which Sanger created are now turning on her. On the right, she's, satanic. On the left, she is an evil racist. And it's just crazy. And this, to me, shows why it's necessary to treat these historical figures as what they were. People exist in their own time where there were certain value systems and ideas that were popular, and these people obviously internalized all of this. But these folks did things that were very good that we benefit from today. So why not take that into consideration rather than bashing them in the case of what the left does, or completely making up crazy BS, which is what the right does with regard to Sanger.
I mean, I think it's really an interesting story, and one that I kind of want to look into a little bit more. I'm going to go read your tweets more closely after this, because, for me, all I have heard about Margaret Sanger is the most overtly like the stuff that's being portrayed is the most overtly racist. And that's true from the left and the right. And I remember thinking, when I first started getting into all of this, like, I personally benefited from Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood was the thing that gave me low cost birth control in college when I couldn't afford, like,
Mhm.
the expensive stuff, because they did it on on a sliding scale. And I was able to get that, up until the time when I could afford to, not be on that sliding scale. And I was always really grateful for that because, I probably would have ended up getting pregnant if I wasn't on birth control, and that wouldn't
Mm.
have been how I wanted to, have a family at that time. And so I was always incredibly grateful for like that gift that Planned Parenthood gave me. And it was one of those things when I would talk about that, I would get absolutely lambasted as like, oh, you're a baby killer and Margaret Sanger this and Margaret Sanger that. And I'm like, I just wanted affordable access to birth control. That was what I cared about. And so I do think that that is one of those stories that isn't, we don't talk about as much. And I would definitely be interested to hear a little bit more about that.
I should probably wind up writing a book about her life. Maybe I'll do that.
Yeah. I bet you're pissing everyone off with those tweets, though. I
I
cannot
am.
imagine what, like, are you getting backlash on Twitter for that?
Oh, extreme backlash, but nobody's threatened to burn my house down yet, so that's nice. But it's it's just people have their preconceived notions and they refuse to hear much of anything to the contrary. But Sanger is just she's a great example of someone who did so much good in her life, and certain things that she said today would be off color. Other things she wrote are just taken way out of context, and yet she's demonized despite creating something that people have benefited from, as you mentioned. And today, whether one sees birth control available at your county health department, whether one sees teenagers being able to use birth control when they're in high school, whether one sees college students being able to have access to birth control, it all stems from what Sanger did. If not for her, none of this would exist. And you have these people who benefit so richly from what she gave society castigate her. And I just find that it's not a matter of left or right or center. I just find that to be on a human level absolutely appalling.
No, I think it's really sad, and I
Mhm.
think I feel like I can relate to it on some level in a more contemporary way, just because I've experienced like that from both the left and the right, where both the left and the right will completely distort things that I've said and turn them into like hit pieces. And what's funny? In the last week, I have literally been called a transphobe and a homophobe in like a Vermont newspaper because I exposed grooming in the Burlington, Vermont school districts with the help of this army of volunteers that I have. So I've been called a homophobe and transphobe for that. And then on the right, I've been called a groomer because I won't get extremist enough and say that every possible discussion about
Uh,
sex in schools is grooming. And it's like, I kind of think that if both sides are attacking you, you maybe have found the sweet spot. It's a
mhm.
consolation because they're attacking you and they're smearing your name all over the internet. But it's kind of like I might be doing something right if the extremists on both sides don't like me.
Absolutely, and it's interesting because what would happen if, say, the left got their way, or then I'll talk about the right. If the left got their way here, there would be kids, literally toddlers. It would get to this point where they'd be given hormonal, quote unquote, therapies to change their gender, and they'd be given sex change operations before they get out of elementary school. I mean, that's where. And meanwhile, these kids are just kids. They don't know basically their foot from a hole in the ground. They absorb everything in the world around them without question at such a young age. They're very impressionable, but still, the left would be transforming these kids into something that they have absolutely no business becoming. If they want to do that as an adult, fine, but let kids be kids. The left is basically using these kids as political pawns and destroying the lives of these children all the while. Then on the right, you have a lot of people who don't want any form of sex education in schools. They want it to be left to the parents, many of whom are devoutly religious, and the end result's going to be a lot of unplanned pregnancies, a lot of back alley abortions, a lot of sexually transmitted diseases being thrown about, and generally speaking, just a very dysfunctional society, all in the name of traditional values. So it's really a crazy situation that you see today with the extremes on both sides. And I'm very sorry that this has come about, but to a certain extent, I mean, you have your true believers, of course, but a lot of other people go along with it, I think, just because they want to own the opposition and they don't realize the damage they're doing in the process.
No, I completely agree with you, and again, it's one of those things where you're stuck in the middle, and you've got like these shouting groups that are just going back and forth, and it just feels like there's no escape.